Ethan Hayes possessed a peculiar fascination, a quiet obsession with the skeletal remains of forgotten railways. His apartment, a cramped space in a brick building overlooking the grimy side of Chicago, was a testament to this, cluttered with dusty maps, faded photographs of locomotives, and brittle, yellowed railway timetables. It wasn't the romance of the rails that drew him, but the mysteries that lingered in their shadows, the stories whispered in the wind that rattled through abandoned stations. His current fixation, the vanishing of the Eternal Night Express in 1930, a train he had discovered through diligent research in forgotten archives that had simply ceased to exist, swallowed by the night, leaving no trace. The mystery had consumed him for months, leading him to believe the key to its disappearance lay in the now dead backwater town of Blackwood Junction. He navigated his beat-up sedan through the increasingly desolate countryside, the once vibrant, farmlands now hollow, hushed whispers of a forgotten time. Blackwood Junction, when he finally saw it, was a ghost of its former self. Weathered, boarded-up storefronts lined a silent main street, and a pervasive stillness hung in the air, a silence broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind. The railway station, a grandiose Victorian structure in its heyday, stood like a decaying monument to a forgotten era, its windows like vacant eyes staring into the empty landscape. Drawn by an irresistible pull, Ethan parked his car and stepped onto the overgrown platform. The air was thick with the scent of rust and decay, the wooden planks beneath his feet groaning with age. The once bustling station was now a graveyard of forgotten dreams, where weeds pushed through cracked concrete and the shadows seemed to writhe with unspoken stories. As he explored the abandoned station, a figure emerged from the shadows. Abigail Holt, a woman with eyes as old as the town itself, her face etched with the stories of generations. She regarded him with a wary curiosity, her gaze flickering from his inquisitive eyes to the yellowed research papers that he held. "You're looking for something that's best left alone," she said, her voice a low, raspy whisper that carried the weight of years. Ethan, undeterred, introduced himself and explained his search for information about the Eternal Night Express. Abigail's expression became more grim as the name was mentioned. "That train," she said, her voice dropping even lower, "was cursed. This whole place, it's cursed. Folks around here, they know better than to speak of it. That train, it took more than just the passengers when it went. It took something else." She told him stories, hushed legends passed down through generations, tales of strange lights and phantom sounds that emanated from the abandoned station on moonless nights. She spoke of a darkness that clung to the place, a malevolent presence that had swallowed the train and still lingered, waiting. "You'd do well to turn back, mister," she warned, her eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. "Some doors are not meant to be opened, and some trails should never be followed." Ethan listened, but was more intrigued than ever, his skepticism beginning to give way to an unsettling curiosity. That said, he thanked her for the warning and ensured her that he would be careful before returning to his investigation of the old train station. He felt a chill go down his back. Despite the warmth of the summer evening, he could feel eyes on him, though he saw nothing. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and orange, and the station's shadows deepened, stretching long fingers across the cracked platform. Ethan, disregarding Abigail's warnings, decided to stay. He wanted to use the last vestiges of daylight to fully examine the area. With a flashlight in hand, he began exploring the old station, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. He noticed a set of overgrown, almost hidden rails that veered off into a dense thicket of trees, disappearing into the darkness. Curiosity piqued. He pushed through the foliage, discovering a forgotten tunnel, its entrance obscured by vines and rusted metal. A sense of anticipation mingled with unease settled over him. He felt as if the station itself was holding its breath, waiting, As he shone his light into the dark tunnel, he imagined the countless trains that may have gone through those very tunnels and the secrets they held within. He shuddered and attributed it to the evening chill. Then it happened. A low, mournful sound echoed through the stillness, a drawn-out, haunting whistle that seemed to emanate from the depths of the tunnel. It was a sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end, a sound that spoke of sorrow and loss. From the darkness of the tunnel, a light appeared, a single flickering beam that slowly grew brighter. And then it emerged, a locomotive cloaked in mist and shadow, its form ancient and imposing. The Eternal Night Express had returned. The train slid into the station, its wheels groaning on the rusted rails, its engine hissing like a restless beast. An ethereal glow emanated from its windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the platform. The station, moments before a desolate graveyard of forgotten dreams, was now bathed in an otherworldly luminescence. Even the decrepit station seemed to be coming back to some form of life. The air grew heavy, charged with an unsettling energy. The temperature dropped and a frigid mist swirled around the train, obscuring its details and lending it an air of spectral menace. Ethan, his skepticism momentarily shattered, felt a primal fear grip him, a fear that whispered of unseen forces and ancient horrors. Despite the terror that clawed at him, an irresistible force compelled him forward. He found his feet moving, against his will, drawn to the train like a moth to a deadly flame. He stepped onto the platform, his heart pounding in his chest, and as if in a trance, boarded the Eternal Night Express. The train's doors hissed shut behind him, sealing him within its cold, metallic embrace. The mournful whistle echoed once more, and the train began to move, its wheels grinding against the rusted rails, carrying him into the heart of the encroaching darkness. The Eternal Night Express plunged into the darkness of the forgotten tunnel, and the world outside vanished, swallowed by the inky blackness. Inside the train, an eerie silence settled, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of the wheels against the rails and the soft, almost imperceptible whispers that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the train itself. Ethan found himself in a dimly lit car, its plush velvet seats worn and faded, the air thick with a cold, musty scent. The train's interior felt ancient, a relic of a bygone era, yet it pulsed with an unsettling energy, a sense of being alive. As the train moved deeper into the tunnel, the dim lights flickered, casting distorted shadows that danced along the walls. The windows, once portals to the outside world, now displayed a swirling vortex of shadows, a hypnotic display that seemed to warp reality. Ethan felt a disorientation, a sense of being adrift in a place that existed outside the boundaries of time and space. He began to notice the other passengers. They were pale, their features gaunt and ethereal, their eyes vacant and filled with a profound sorrow. They moved with a slow, deliberate gait, their voices hushed whispers that seemed to echo from beyond the grave. Some repeated the same phrases, the same actions over and over, trapped in an endless loop of their final moments. One woman, her elegant dress stained with what looked like old blood, repeatedly adjusted a locket around her neck, her lips murmuring a name, a desperate plea. A man, his face contorted in a silent scream, clutched a crumpled letter to his chest, his knuckles white. Ethan observed an old couple holding hands, staring through the windows with empty eyes, their expressions showing a chilling acceptance of a grim fate. Ethan tried to speak to them, to make sense of their spectral presence, but they seemed oblivious to his existence, their attention fixed on their own internal torment. The whispers around him grew louder, a cacophony of sorrowful voices, each telling a fragment of a tragic story. He gathered bits and pieces, whispers of a terrible accident, a sudden catastrophe that had claimed their lives. As the train journeyed on, the very structure of the cars seemed to change. the walls shifting and warping, the corridors twisting into impossible angles. Ethan felt a creeping sense of unease, a feeling that the train was not merely a vehicle, but a living entity, a creature that fed on the pain and sorrow of its spectral passengers. He looked through the train windows, and the outside of the train now showed a landscape that defied logic. Forests of twisted metal and skies filled with perpetual twilight. He had the distinct impression that the train was not moving through space, but through a reality of its own, a reality of nightmares and sorrow. As the train rattled deeper into the unnatural landscape, Ethan's sense of reality began to fray. He moved through the shifting carriages, each one a tableau of spectral misery, piecing together the fragments of the passengers' final moments. The repeated phrases, the haunting gestures, they weren't random echoes. They were snapshots of a shared tragedy. He discovered old newspapers, brittle and faded, strewn across the seats and floors. The headlines screamed of a catastrophic train wreck, a derailment in 1930 that had claimed the lives of everyone on board. The Eternal Night Express, once a symbol of progress and luxury, had become a tomb, a vessel of sorrow. But there was more to the story, a darker undercurrent that ran beneath the surface of the tragedy. He found fragments of a journal, its pages filled with the frantic scribblings of a man named Silas Blackwood. Blackwood was the train's conductor, and his words spoke of a growing unease, a sense of something wrong, something malevolent that was taking root within the train. Blackwood wrote of strange occurrences, of shadows that moved on their own, of whispers that seemed to emanate from the train's very core. He spoke of a growing dread, a feeling that they were being watched, that something unseen was guiding their journey. He spoke of a dark feeling that seemed to emanate from the engine itself, as if it was a living thing. As Ethan delved deeper into the journal, a chilling realization dawned on him. The train wreck wasn't just an accident, it was a sacrifice, a ritual of some kind. Blackwood, driven by desperation or madness, had made a pact with a dark entity, offering the lives of his passengers in exchange for something. He started to notice that not all of the spectral passengers were indifferent to him. Some watched him with a chilling intensity, their vacant eyes filled with a flicker of recognition. Some reached out to him with ghostly hands, their touch cold as death, whispering warnings and pleas for help. But there were others, their faces twisted in malevolent grins that seemed to want him to stay. They watched him with hungry eyes, like predators watching prey. He felt a presence, an unseen force that moved through the train, observing him, testing him. It was a cold, pervasive feeling, a sense of being trapped in a predator's den. He began to suspect that the train was not just a vehicle, but a trap, a prison for lost souls, and that he was now one of its inmates. The train itself was a hungry beast, and it wanted more passengers. The train shuddered, its wheels grinding against unseen rails as it plunged deeper into the nightmarish landscape. The distorted forests and perpetual twilight outside the windows grew more intense, the very air inside the train thickening with a palpable sense of dread. Ethan, his heart pounding against his ribs, realized that they were approaching the end of the line, a place where reality itself seemed to unravel. The train's interior began to change dramatically. The walls twisted and writhed, the corridors elongated into impossible stretches, and the spectral passengers grew more agitated, their whispers escalating into a chorus of mournful cries. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a dark, malevolent force that emanated from the engine, a presence that Ethan knew was Silas Blackwood. He pressed forward, determined to confront the entity that controlled the train and free the trapped souls. The train's engine room, a cavernous space filled with hissing steam and clanking machinery, pulsed with an unholy light. Blackwood, his form a shimmering silhouette of shadow and smoke, stood before him, his eyes glowing with a malevolent intensity. "You should not have come." Blackwood's voice echoed through the room, a raspy, distorted sound that seemed to emanate from the very walls. "This is not your place. This train, it is mine." Ethan, despite the fear that threatened to consume him, stood his ground. He spoke of the trapped souls, of the lives sacrificed, of the dark pact that had damned them all. Blackwood scoffed, his form shifting and contorting, revealing the true nature of the entity he had become. "They were weak," he hissed, his voice filled with a chilling contempt. "They were sacrifices, fuel for the engine, for my power. This train, it transcends life and death. It exists beyond your comprehension." During the confrontation, it became clear that Blackwood was no longer just a ghost. The pact he had made had transformed him into something far more sinister, a dark entity that fed on the pain and sorrow of others. He demonstrated powers that defy normal physics, and the train itself seemed to bend to his will. Ethan, using the knowledge he had gathered from the journal and from the spectral passengers themselves, tried to reason with Blackwood and to remind him of his former humanity. However, the entity was too far gone, and it attacked Ethan with unrelenting ferocity. The engine room became a battleground, the very train shaking and groaning under the force of their conflict. The confrontation with Blackwood reached a fever pitch. The engine room, once a space of mechanical precision, became a chaotic arena of supernatural forces. Blackwood, no longer human, unleashed waves of dark energy, the very air around him, twisting and distorting. Ethan, driven by a desperate need to stop the entity, fought back, using his wits and the fragments of knowledge he had gleaned from the train's history. He discovered that Blackwood's power was tied to the train itself, to the lingering sorrow and pain that permeated its very structure. By focusing his attention on the train's tortured history, by invoking the memories of the lost passengers, he began to weaken Blackwood's hold. The spectral passengers, sensing a chance for release, rallied, their whispers growing into a chorus of mournful cries that echoed through the train. They assailed Blackwood with their collective sorrow, their ghostly forms swirling around him, weakening him. Blackwood, weakened and enraged, lashed out, his dark energy tearing through the engine room, damaging the machinery and threatening to tear the train apart. Ethan, seeing an opportunity, seized control of the train's controls and began to force the train to derail. He understood that the train itself was part of the problem and that to defeat Blackwood, the train had to be destroyed. The train shuddered violently, its wheels screeching against the rails as it veered off course. The landscape outside the windows dissolved into a chaotic swirl of light and shadow, the very fabric of reality tearing apart. Blackwood screamed in rage, his form flickering and dissolving as his connection to the train weakened. As the train began to break apart, Ethan managed to guide the train back towards the original tunnel, towards Blackwood Junction. The train entered the tunnel, and as it passed through, the effects began to be noticeable. The unnatural geography outside of the train windows began to distort, and then disappear, replaced by the natural world outside. The train burst through. The tunnel entrance and the spectral train started to vanish, phasing out of reality. Blackwood, with a final, furious scream, also vanished, disappearing with the remains of the train, his presence gone. The station, moments before a scene of supernatural chaos, returned to its desolate state, the only evidence of the train's existence being the mangled and damaged rails and the lingering chill in the air. Ethan, battered and bruised, his mind reeling from the horrors he had witnessed, stumbled off the remains of the train. He had won, but at a terrible price. He was alive, but he would forever be changed. The experience left deep psychological scars. The immediate aftermath was a jarring return to normalcy, or as close to it as Blackwood Junction could offer. The mangled rails, now mere twisted metal, stood as the only physical testament to the night's horrors. The spectral train and its malevolent conductor were gone, vanished like a nightmare upon waking. Ethan, however, remained, a lone figure amidst the desolation, his mind reeling from the impossible truths he had witnessed. He found Abigail Holt waiting for him near the edge of the town. Her old eyes, usually filled with a weary acceptance, now held a flicker of something akin to awe, mixed heavily with grave concern. She had seen the impossible, the spectral lights and the tearing of reality itself when the train had phased. Back through to their reality. You've stirred things that should have remained still, she said, her voice heavy with a grim understanding. That train, it was a wound, a tear in the veil. And now, she trailed off, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as if searching for something unseen. Ethan shared his experiences, the spectral passengers, the twisted reality within the train, and the entity that had consumed Silas Blackwood. Abigail listened, her face etched with a mix of fear and ancient knowledge. She told him of local legends, stories whispered through generations about places where the boundaries between worlds thinned, where the echoes of past tragedies lingered, waiting to be awakened. Blackwood wasn't just a man, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He was a vessel, a conduit for something older, something darker, and that train, it was his instrument, his way to bring that darkness here. Abigail explained that the train, even in its destroyed state, had left a residue of its presence, a lingering echo that could draw other entities, other nightmares. She warned Ethan that the station, now a focal point for supernatural activity, was more dangerous than ever. She went on to explain that due to some old rituals that were carried out in the town, in very specific circumstances, the train could, theoretically, return. Those circumstances being specific astronomical alignments and specific dates that coincide with the original accident. Ethan, despite his exhaustion and lingering terror, felt a sense of responsibility. He had opened a door, and he now felt compelled to close it. He spent the next few days researching local legends, delving into old records, and seeking out any information that could shed light on the dark entity that had possessed Blackwood. He became aware that the next astronomical alignment that could allow for the return of the train was in only a few months. He returned to the abandoned station, armed with his newfound knowledge and a desperate hope of preventing the train's return. The station, under the pale moonlight, exuded a chilling aura. Shadows danced in the corners of his eyes, and whispers seemed to slither through the silence. He could feel the eyes of unseen entities. As he prepared for the final confrontation, a low, mournful whistle echoed through the night, a sound that sent a shiver down his spine. It was a familiar sound, the ghostly call of the Eternal Night Express. He was too late. The air grew heavy, and a cold mist rolled in, obscuring the station in a shroud of spectral fog. From the shadows, the train began to materialize, its form shimmering and distorted, a ghost of its former self. Ethan, his heart pounding, faced the returning horror, ready to confront the darkness once more. The book ends with Ethan watching the train reappear and taking a deep, calming breath. The train would be back, in one form or another, until the evil it represented was fully destroyed.